I was born in Oxford, England. My parents were there just after the war. My father had been an RAF pilot. After the war, England was struggling. Everything was rationed, and people were having a tough time. And I think 1948, they moved back to Canada. My mother was a school teacher, and my father was an accountant. So we had a nice house in the suburbs of Toronto in Downsview. But no, we weren't wealthy at all. Oh, I was a mediocre student, continually being told I should do better. Had to repeat grade 13, then I got into U of T, took a degree in political science. I had a series of jobs as a salesman of pharmaceuticals. I wasn't making any money. I wasn't having any success. I wasn't in any kind of a long-term relationship, at least at that time. So I was really just treading water. And it was at that point I decided I had to start all over again. How do you reboot your life when you're 27 or 28? Well, maybe I can get an MBA. And then, as the story goes, applied to every business school in Canada, and they all turned me down. So if I was depressed before that, I was really depressed at that point. I had no idea what I was going to do. And then towards the end of August, I get the call from the University of Ottawa saying, was I still interested? My assumption was that somebody who had agreed to come had dropped out, and they told me, look, your marks are terrible. We're taking a big risk here to let you into our program. Don't embarrass us. And that, I was so grateful and so thankful. The rest, as they say, is history. It turned my life around. It did exactly what you would hope. Finally, I was taking subjects that I was interested in, business and economics. Not only was I willing to work harder on those kind of subjects than I had been in the past, but I was getting better marks.
I first met Ian Telfer when I came to the University of Ottawa for the MBA program. So I arrived the first day and went to the cafeteria. And there in the cafeteria, I saw a guy probably roughly my age, sitting there reading the Globe and Mail. It was Ian. So we had a lot of things in common. We shared an objective. We didn't take ourselves too seriously, at least at the time. And it turned out to be a terrific friendship.
Well, we both got out of the program in 1976. I got recruited to work at a mining company. That was okay. I liked that. I had a little bit of success there. I got promoted a couple of times. And then I got contacted from some finance people that were going to start a mining company in Brazil from scratch. And so I went and joined them. And that's when things really started to click. And then the price of gold went down and the mine didn't work. I read about all these internet incubators in the United States. So I thought, well, maybe I should start an internet incubator. But of course, I didn't know anything about the internet. And so after a couple of years, I went bankrupt. So there I was, mid-50s, bankrupt, teamed up with Frank Giustra. We said, let's form a gold mining company. Gold was right at the bottom. And it just all took off, There's no reward without risk. You'll never have anything happen for you if you don't take some kind of risk.
He was prepared to deal with failures as they came up and learn from them and then move on. When many people would quit, I had enough, but he was prepared to keep going. He eventually ended up building the third largest gold company in the world. So if you think back to that person I ran into in the cafeteria at the University of Ottawa, and what he'd gone through and what he achieved, it really is impressive, very unique.
I got a phone call in Vancouver one evening, a student here, raising money for a scholarship. And I said, yeah, sure. And you could tell, you go, pardon, And I said, I'd like to go to the first-year MBA student with the worst marks. And then, I started to have some success in the gold business. And so Michael Kelly at one point said, hey, we're thinking of looking for a donation to name the school. He said they were looking for $25 million. So I was thrilled to do it, because as I say, the most important phone call I ever got was letting me into the school.
In 2005, he launched a competition to find an apprentice, and I applied for the position really for interview practice and for the opportunity to meet someone from a different industry. Not really wanting to move out west at that time. I had a young family, but once I met Ian, it was clear that this was the place that I needed to be. I loved his vision, his leadership style, and he had an ability to motivate everybody around him.
Ian's got a lot of very admirable traits. One of them is a commitment he feels to give back to those who've helped him.
It's an incredible opportunity. I was so fortunate. It was a chance of a lifetime. It didn't take me too long to realize that either. I'm forever grateful to Ian Telfer for believing in me.
Very proud of Ian. Always proud of Ian.
I mean, my life's turned into something I couldn't have imagined. You know, I didn't grow up that way. My parents didn't live like that. It's just incredible. Lucky me.